Lawyers of Reddit, what was the least defendable case ever brought to you? A woman wanted me to sue her previous lawyer for charging her a lot of money but producing almost no work to justify his fees. She gave me what she told me was the lawyer's total work product, a page printed off the internet for which she said she was charged thousands of dollars for legal advice. She had already brought a claim via my jurisdiction's disciplinary body for lawyers. She had lost and wanted to bring an appeal. The judgment kept referring to documents that I hadn't seen. I pushed her to give me everything and she came in with multiple files full of immaculate legal work that totally justified the fees she was fighting. We told her to get lost but she wasted a lot of my time before we realized she was full of shitty. Did you charge her? No. I suppose we could have, but we were ultimately refusing to take her case or carry out her instructions, so we thought it best to just get rid of her. Also, she was crazy. Crazier than my account above sets out. She was paranoid and possibly mildly delusional. Charging her for the work would have perhaps been cruel. This guy murdered his father, then during the trial he sent death threats to his mother. Genuine question. Don't you feel weird defending someone who murdered somebody? Like, your job is to reduce the time he spends in jail, right? The obviously guilty ones are easy. You do your best to ensure the process is fair and just and lawful, and if you still lose, the system worked. It's the innocent ones that you lose sleep over. So this guy ordered a pizza. Nowhere was it specified that the delivery was supposed to be done under 30 minutes, but the guy assumed that because movies. The delivery arrived 1 hour later, and to apologize even if it wasn't necessary. They brought him his order and an additional beef pizza. The guy wanted our firm to sue them because he is Hindu, doesn't eat beef, and apparently felt offended. And X200B. Also, this one time this dude wanted us to sue his neighbor because he assumed the guy was practicing black magic. A lady was sacked by a large company. They had caught her embezzling money to fund a gambling habit. They had clear evidence the embezzling had occurred, and she did not deny it. She sued the company for $300,000 for unfair dismissal. My sister's firm represented the company against this woman. The case was so easy. The firm gave it to my sister as her first ever solo attempt. My sister screwed it up badly. Not only did she lose, the court awarded the woman $500,000 instead of the $300,000 she asked for. In the end, it was a good career move. The partners all knew her name and dropped into her office, one by one, to offer their sympathy. What did she do? I mean, if there's evidence and a confession, WTF? I'm not entirely sure. I know she botched the negotiation for a settlement, and then she must have made a serious mistake during the proceedings and really irritated the court. Not my client, but my dad, at the hospital he worked at, was sued by a gentleman after he saved his wife's life. Details. Patient is pregnant with 8th child and miscarries. The fetus is removed but the patient starts bleeding uncontrollably. The only option available is a hysterectomy. It was either that, or she dies right there on the table. My dad gets called in to do the surgery. Performs it successfully. Hooray. The patient's husband is quite devout and beyond peace, said that his wife can't have any more kids. So he sued the hospital. No firm would represent him, and he ended up bringing proceedings himself. Went all the way to trial and he lost hard. My dad got sued once because the hospital forgot to rotate the patient and she got bed sores. She comes into his office and he's like, what the hell? I can't treat you as a patient while you're suing me. She's like, no, I'm not. Why would I sue you after you saved my life? He's been her doctor for 30 years too. She makes some calls. Turns out her kids sued him for pain and suffering. Not on her, but to them. So she lost a doctor she trusted because of her kids. Normally the doctor gets dropped at the hearing, because this is really the hospital's fault and it's common for them to sue everyone and see what sticks. Nope, they didn't. He had to go to trial for it. He won. But yeah. Probably my client charged with statutory RPA, multiple counts. who impregnated his high school sweetheart's daughter after having sex with said daughter from the ages of 13-15. He was 35 at the time of the birth. DNA in the form of a baby is strong evidence for the state. Just wondering, but how do you deal with somebody so horrible? Can you refuse to take it? Not a lawyer. But I've worked with legal defense teams. I deal with it by reminding myself that I'm not supporting this abhorrent behavior, but that I am protecting their right to a fair trial. My dad had a client who was on trial for being a felon in possession of firearms, possession of stolen property, burglary, and distribution of narcotics. Guy had multiple pictures of himself on Facebook holding guns, drugs, and cash, and had videos of himself both breaking into someone's house and stealing a gun as well as selling crack on several occasions. Despite my dad basically telling the genius he was going to prison either way, and to plead out for a reduced sentence, dude still pleaded not guilty. We still occasionally joke that the guy clearly wasn't competent to stand trial by virtue of being so dumb. I don't understand people's fascination for posting their crimes on Facebook. Morons. Validation. They want people to look at them and think, wow, he's so cool. He's above the system. The cops can't stop him. And since cops aren't on his friends list, there is no way that they would be able to trace his illegal actions through the internet. Not a lawyer. But I feel bad for YNW Melly's lawyer. Dude wrote 3 songs about murdering someone. Murdered 2 people in his vehicle. Drove them to the hospital and said it was a drive-by. The shell casings of the bullets were in his car. Cell phone GPS pings him at the murder scene. He said he'd murder them in text messages and the dude pleads not guilty. I imagine that if you take a job like that you probably have to disconnect emotionally and just play the part, as if it were a speech and debate exercise. Then, after your client of course loses, you go cash your paycheck. A guy wanted to sue God because it was unfair to blame the rest of us for Adam's poor choice. I read about a guy who tried to sue the devil for making him commit crimes. The judge threw it out when the man couldn't prove the devil lived in the judge's jurisdiction. I represented a tree trimming company that went to the wrong address and cut down all the mature trees in that yard. The right address was 100 North XXXX Street. And the company went to 100 South XXXX Street and just went straight at it, hacking away. I still have no idea why the insurance company didn't just settle that one pursuit. Worked in-house for a famous character company with a large fan base. A few crazies a year call in. A guy called in claiming that we stole characters that he created and demanded to be compensated. I calmly ask them to provide more details so I can determine whether this has any merit to it. He states he designed the characters himself and gave it to the well-known actual creator when he was a kid, and the creator pawned them off as his own. I asked him when he was born, and it's a good 20 years after these characters were actually created. I ask him to explain this, and he pivots and says he also created some other well-known famous characters and brands. Characters and brands that are not owned by my company. I kindly ask that if he wants to pursue anything to send us something in writing and hang up. I figured if he wasn't going to do some really basic research on his own claim, he wasn't going to spend any time to write it up. Never heard from him again. Not a lawyer. I was a jailer and used to pull double duty as a bailiff. A guy stole a pickup truck and was later captured passed out behind the wheel parked on a sidewalk surrounded by a ludicrous amount of dogs and guns. His legal defense? He elected to represent himself because he wasn't done being stupid. Double jeopardy. You can't charge me for theft, drugs, and felon in possession of a weapon because I've already been convicted all of those charges before. In short, during his jury trial he admitted to doing it but explained with a smug grin that since he had already done time for the same charges from another case before that he could not be prosecuted for them ever again. This is not how double jeopardy works, folks. He's in prison for 20 years now. If he'd taken legal counsel he could have easily cut a deal for 5. Some of my colleagues have regretted taking cases with difficult clients. Typically, those clients would keep sabotaging their own case by doing stupid shit during litigation. But it seems like you're looking for a lawyer who has some sort of moral aversion to the crime the client committed. Up front when you take the case, you know what you're getting into. So most lawyers with any aversion would decline to take it up front, as opposed to regretting it later on. Any specific cases? I had a client like this. A real estate guy who decided to get into government. Had a lot of investigations going against him, but instead of letting his lawyers do the talking, he kept tweeting random nonsense about the cases. Tried to take his phone, but somehow he always gets a new one. Can't keep his mouth shut. Somehow he hasn't ended up in prison yet. I read a patent and told my bosses it was both invalid and infringed by no one. It has 10 means for elements in each patent claim that no one would practice, or that weren't supported in the written description. Partners, my bosses, new to patent litigation, sued on the patent anyway using young, inexperienced, unseasoned attorneys in the firm. 3 years later, after billing the client millions of dollars, every defendant won by proving each claim either not infringed or invalid. Then my employer appealed and billed the client another load of money, with a young attorney in charge of the appeal that didn't understand the underlying issues on any level because he was a former teacher instead of patent attorney. It was such a bad patent no one would settle at any point in the case. My bosses were blood-sucking trolls. I quit for these and similar parallel reasons. The firm finally imploded. It's like a 100-way tie for first place. Spoiler alert. They had FedEx in them. Less frequently. It was a gun. And yeah, let's just say the I have a permit defense for the latter was not something we had to worry about round those parts. You'd be surprised how quickly cases become at least theoretically defensible as soon as you establish any distance whatsoever between the client and the contraband. Though, in fact, I'd say there's a systematic bias in juries, and lots of inconsistency in the relevant case law, about how difficult it is, and or ought to be, to prove possession beyond a reasonable doubt. It errs, of course, in favor of the prosecution. I had a client who won just shy of a 7-figure settlement in a personal injury case. She then dropped into my office to ask me to file a fee dispute against the attorney who represented her in the personal injury action. That attorney took a little over $260,000 on this case. If you're doing the math at home, this guy took a 27% fee on the type of case where 40% fees are common. Did a freaking fantastic job because the woman got nearly $1 million. And then she turned around and tried to sue him to recover any of his fees. I rejected the case out of hand and then got an ethics complaint for discriminating against her. Not a lawyer, but I was a witness to an assault a few years back. Had to get up in the box and be questioned. Terrifying. Anyway, it was on a night out, hanging around outside a club. A female friend of mine took exception to some dude grabbing her ass. Both start slinging insults at each other until the guy decides to sling his fist at her face instead. Right in the presence of 3 police officers, who witnessed the whole thing and arrested him immediately. The guy for some reason denied it all, despite being caught literally red-handed by the popo, and it had to be resolved in court. How would you even argue on his behalf? Worked in family law in California for like 2 years before deciding I'd hang myself if I didn't change career paths. In CA, the obligation to pay spousal support, alimony, ends when the recipient begins cohabitation with a new romantic partner. A guy who was positively getting fricked in half in his monthly payments came to the office and said he was aware of the rule about cohabitation and wanted me to argue his point in court. You see, his ex was a narcissist she was in love with, and had begun cohabitation with herself. Her presence in her apartment should count the same as if there were a romantic partner there. He was bordering on begging me to take his money. I refused. Not a lawyer. But here's the most amusing time I had while being an expert witness to tell the court about chemical risks. Without naming too many details and faking the chemical's name. It was about a small group of workers suing their very large corporate employer for unsafe working conditions with hydrogen chloride. So, I confirmed I didn't know these people and wasn't, or hadn't, worked for the company. Said sure, I'll do it and went off. I sat there answering a lot of super leading questions. What is this substance? Is it dangerous to do? Exceptionally stupid action? What would happen if you drank it, poured it over your head? Did you say that hilariously insufficient protection is enough to handle hydrogen chloride, etc. 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 That took about 30-45 minutes. After which I had just about sweated through my suit. Even though I wasn't even on trial. The defense steps up and goes, "Thank you for answering all those questions. We would like to remind the court that the substance in question is not hydrogen chloride, but is, in fact, sodium chloride. Could you briefly sum up the risks in working with sodium chloride?" A man once came to me wanting to sue someone for the wrongful death of his brother. But he couldn't keep his story straight. He said that his brother had been strangled while fishing. So I asked if the police had apprehended the murderer. Then he told me that there wasn't a murderer. That's why he wanted to sue for wrongful death. I asked him who he was suing. And he told me he wanted to sue the jeweler who made the ring. What ring? Well, the ring that made him strangle his brother. I politely declined and contacted the police as soon as he left my office. They apparently chased him into the mountains, but never found him. Not a lawyer. My husband sat on a jury in case regarding the defendant taking payment for sex. The police had hidden in a wardrobe to prove the defendant was a prostitute. They may have witnessed the sex, but not the payment, if any, as the couple went downstairs after the act. He successfully got the rest of the jury to give a not guilty verdict. I think it's super fricked up that prostitution is illegal in so many countries. Like seriously. People are gonna pay for sex no matter what. Criminalizing this is just some holier than thou bullshit. A lady didn't pay her general contractor upwards of $20k after the job was finished because of a dozen or so minor complaints, like he was slow. Told her she should pay and we could help her with her complaints. Else he will probably be successful getting a lien on her home. She didn't pay. He got a lien on her home. Even offered to help her stash the funds in escrow pending their dispute, and would prevent a lien in the meantime. Nope. My best guess is that she didn't have the money and was attempting a tantrum to get out of it. This was my 1L internship, literally the first person to ever approach me in a legal capacity. Later that fall, she showed up to my school and was demanding my info from the front office. Who handled it well and I never saw her. She blames me for losing her home. I told you to pay or you'd lose your home. You didn't pay and lost your home. Surprise Pikachu face. I have a relative who's a lawyer. She worked for a hospital on a wrongful life case that was pretty miserable. Plaintiff had given birth to a baby with very severe congenital deformities. Plaintiff sued every health professional she saw while pregnant, claiming that if they had told her about the deformities, she would have aborted. A quick look at medical records shows that the plaintiff never really pursued prenatal care. She went to a local emergency room very early in her pregnancy to get a pregnancy test, apparently common in impoverished communities. And she returned to that same ED a month later with abdominal pain. The ED doc did an ultrasound on her belly and determined the fetus was not in distress. But he did not do a thorough exam because he wanted to figure out where the belly pain was coming from. Not do an organ scan like an OB would. But she sued that hospital. Then she was arrested for check fraud and saw a physician in jail. But she didn't tell that doc about her pregnancy. So he didn't do an ultrasound at all. But she sued whoever provides that healthcare, the jail. Maybe? Just a sad case that the hospital won handily. Not me, but my dad's lawyer. My dad's ex-wife decided that they weren't getting on with divorce proceedings fast enough and decided to make a move while my dad was at work and we were all at school. So she locked my little brother in my room, The only one they didn't touch, and called over 40 plus people to take whatever she thought was hers, so pretty much everything. Including furniture. Old music and pictures from before she was even around. Close bracket. I show up to the house to pick up my little brother and it's empty. I don't know what she thought was gonna happen when she possessed many things that were obviously my dad's. Like pictures of just me and him. Or the computer that he bought through his job at Dell. My dad sued her 3 times and won every time. She just got caught laundering money from the summer camp she worked at and my old Boy Scout troop. That her son was now in. Frick her. Interestingly enough, my dad just remarried to a district attorney. I'm a paralegal. Local guy in his 20s decides to go rob his dealer. He got the wrong apartment. And the college girl opened the door, he shot her in the face and fled. She laid there for hours just out of reach of her cell phone. And listened to it ring while her mom called. She lived. A neighbor found her. Now she's paralyzed from the neck down. And her face is very deformed. This is a small town. During the trial the jury was shown just how strung out Ondagsha was. And how he even bragged to a few friends that he shot someone. That's pretty damn hard to defend. He got 40 something years. The girl that drove him to and from the apartment was also given jail time. Dad in his 60s hadn't been paying child support for decades and he owed more than $60k for 2 kids who were adults now. He was basically living at a farm in the middle of nowhere so no one could find him. He worked for cash so the money could not be garnished from anywhere. He then came into an inheritance, which was deposited in his bank account and promptly confiscated by family maintenance. He wanted it back. I got sued for $50,000 by a man who claimed his arm was broken when he sideswiped my car at 2 AM. We both got a DUI. And he was also cited for going the wrong way on the freeway. My attorney determined that the guy had been to the DR the day before the accident and had received treatments to his broken arm. He was charged with filing a false police report. And some other charges. Ended up doing 90 days in county lockup. I paid my fine. Did the required procedure to get my license back. And learned my lesson. Guy wanted me to sue the city because the city took too long to bust his neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. Guy claimed his neighbor's house had mice because of the garbage truck that was parked there when it wasn't hauling garbage. He said the neighbor's mice were causing his house to have mice, reducing the value of his house so he couldn't sell it. I asked him how long he had been trying to sell his house. He said he wasn't trying to sell it yet. I asked him what he had done about the mice so far. He said he called the city to have them get rid of the mice but the city refused. I asked when he reported the neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. He told me he never reported it. The city just towed the garbage truck after the neighbor was arrested for some unrelated crime, DUI. I asked the guy how he knew all this. And he said the neighbor and him were partners in the illegal garbage disposal business and his neighbor's old lady told him about the arrest in the towed garbage truck. Civil trial attorney here. Had a case where 2 employees went out after work and got drunk. One of them hit and paralyzed someone on his way home. Employee went to jail, etc. The only issue in the civil case was whether they were still acting in the course and scope of their employment until they got home. If so, the company would have been vicariously liable. We filed a motion with the court arguing that they were not as a matter of law and that the other side could not raise any tribal issue of material fact that they were. We lost that motion. Case settled soon after. I didn't think a jury would have liked that one. I'm on the other side now. What kind of court would find post-workplace drinks a tortious act that your employer could be vicariously liable? I might add some facts for you. 1. He was driving a company car. 2. Marketing and socializing were part of his job. 3. They had done it before and expensed it. Legally. It's complicated and I'll have to answer that question either poorly now, which I won't do, or when I have a bit more time to draft a proper response. But basically the issue is more complicated when you give them a car and when they don't clock in and out. Not a lawyer. But when I worked at a call center for AT&T, a dude called in and threatened to sue us because the technician was servicing his wife. Probably trolling. But he wasn't giving me a super hard time and he actually let me transfer him to our legal department. Not sure why you'd troll if you're not going to be an ass about it. That's too funny. Go to be a troll if he's not upset about it. I mean, he was upset, but relatively calm about it. I've had people threaten to come find me and throw me out of a window over their internet issues. So this dude was being reasonable about it. I just figure if I'm going to troll someone over the phone with that accusation, I'd be playing it up a lot more than he did. He sounded like an older dude. So IDK. Could have been legit. We were defending a hostile workplace claim. I'm speaking with the manager who allegedly threatened violence against the plaintiff. I tell him one of the allegations is that he threatened to kill the plaintiff during his annual review. Manager says, "No way. All I did was opens desk drawer and places pistol on desk in front of me, was put this gun on the table. It wasn't even pointed at him." As a former public defender, I'd say roughly 50% of the cases assigned to me were completely undefendable because of some combination of video evidence, police where body cams where I was practicing, multiple credible eyewitnesses, my client's name and driver's license on a pawn ticket for stolen goods, or my client just straight up admitted to the police they did it. I don't want to get into specifics because of attorney-client privilege, but I had a few clients who, at our initial meeting, would say they were innocent. It's all a big misunderstanding, etc. Then I'd show them a video of the police busting in their trailer. Client is on top of his so beating the shit out of her with 2 children under 5 present. And then fights with the police and ends up get tased and piecing himself. We could have won that one if only being on lethal amounts of bath salts was a defense. I was sitting in court waiting to be called and a guy before me was arguing that after a fight in the street, he went home to get ready for a job interview with a forestry company, and that explained why he was seen chasing the guy who he'd been fighting with 10 minutes before down the street with an axe and a zombie knife. It was 11 PM. He couldn't find the confirmation of his job interview and he was on CCTV running down the street screaming he was going to kill him. All in all, his lawyer just stood there and asked that they take a brief recess to talk. My sister was an EMT. Late one night, she came up on a wreck on the highway and pulled over to help. She was driving the ambulance. A drunk driver had hit the Jersey wall. The cop arrived later. The driver concocted a story that she gave him a bottle Jack Daniels while in the back of the ambulance to calm his nerves. Not only did she have to go to court to dispute this stupid story, she had to go 3 times due to continuances. He lost. I'm not a lawyer, but my father is. And this was his first case. Basically, this man was accused of murder and in his defense he claimed it was self-defense. Turns out he intentionally murdered a man so his wife could do black magic. Although he didn't tell this to my father and the evidences only showed up at the actual judgment. This is my favorite story of a crime ever. My cousin was graffiting a wall when the police showed up. He proceeded to throw a bag of meth at the officer to impede him, grabbed the officer's bike and took off on it. They are tracked and led straight to his house, where he refused entry and had a standoff. From memory, here were the charges: damage to public property, possession of a prohibited substance with intent to distribute, theft, impeding a law officer, resisting arrest, and a few others that they just tacked on because honestly he was 100% fricked anyway, so why not? Additional info: when he got out of prison on good behavior parole, he was brought back within 2 weeks for fraud when he started scamming through Amazon.